Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular, any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. CC, hello and welcome. CC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling.
There isn't any one person that should make or break your film. Really, you have to kind of know you're in it, pace yourself. You're in it for the long haul. It's not one thing that should put you off your film if it's really, really what you want to do. Because your film is going to be a series of obstacles. That's all it is.
Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 50. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. A number of years ago, I found myself in the dead of winter in Chicago editing on a documentary film. It was for a Cambodian film called A Perfect Soldier, and it was produced by a Jonathan Lecoq, whose name you might recognize from an earlier episode of TDL. He and his wife Clara were on the program talking about their boutique post-production business called Coat of Arms, which they run out of Helvetia, West Virginia. In any case, this was how I first met and worked with Jonathan in Chicago. These were the classic days of 12 to 15 hours of editing with very few breaks except for meals and quick email checks. I'd be showered, fed, and working on the edit by 8 in the morning, and I wouldn't really shut down the work sometimes until even 11 at night. Now, this wasn't a mandate that I'd be working this many hours or anything. It was mostly by choice. I was loving immersing myself in the Cambodian footage and trying to make a story out of it. Of course, I was also staying at the director John's house, and he was working similar hours at a desk that was really only about 15 feet from me. If he was going to be that dedicated to the film, I was sure going to do my damnedest to do the same. Now, I was there for about 5 weeks working on the edit, working 6-day weeks, and I was accustomed to this kind of work when I was on an edit for the most part, so it didn't seem like a huge deal to me. The year prior, I was pulling a similar schedule on another doc edit. But at some point, early on in that 3rd week, things kind of finally caught up to me. I found myself starting to get restless, even though I was super tired, just sitting at that desk hours on end. And we were basically up high in an attic area, so it was pretty cold as well. Again, think Chicago in January. After yet another dinner break of probably ham and cheese sandwiches on some white bread, maybe chased down with a beer or something. One night I found myself alone in his family's kitchen, and I suddenly got pretty down. I felt also kind of ill. I felt queasy from the cheap, not exactly nutritious foods I'd been consuming over the past couple of weeks. And my eyes were super itchy from a lack of quality sleep. Other than John and his family, I hadn't really spoken to anyone in a couple of weeks. So yeah, other than the internet, I felt completely disconnected to any real human interaction. And my body really ached, and it was super tight. And I was a runner, but I hadn't really run much in the 2 weeks since being there. Newsflash, running in Portland in January, not the same thing as running in Chicago in January. At that moment, I knew that I really didn't feel like going back up to the cold, damp attic and sitting back down in front of these bright screens to get back to the editing. And more than that, I didn't think that I could bring my mind back to making the story. I was completely wiped out. I was super low energy, and on top of that, a blinding headache was starting to settle in. So I decided to call a friend and colleague. And after listening to me tell her about my first world problems, she kind of laughed and told me she knew exactly what I was going through. This person was also working in the creative field. And then she began to give me some very practical advice that I was able to put in place immediately. She also sent me a book, which initially I thought was going to be a little too self-help or woo-woo for me, but I ended up really digging it, and I was up for anything. I cared deeply about the job that I was doing, and I knew that in order to keep doing it, or certainly to do it the way that I was capable of doing it, I was going to need to make some adjustments. So I went upstairs, and I had a heart-to-heart with the director. And John's a super sweet guy, so I felt really comfortable doing this. And he totally got it, so that was helpful. And John would end up talking to Jonathan, the producer, and they both agreed that something needed to change. And they were able to swing a deal with a local gym for the next few weeks so I could at least pick up my running, which I was very grateful for. I was really missing the activity, the physical activity, and it allowed me to get away from the editing space for a bit and interact with the outside world. Be a human. I also started making a conscious effort to buy slightly healthier foods. I also began for the first time doing something I'd never done before. I started meditating. I started to sleep a little bit better, and I would feel more refreshed in the morning. And the breaks that I would take, they seemed to have more intention, if that makes any sense, and they started to certainly feel refreshing themselves. And the work definitely became stronger for it. The edit started to flow more smoothly. The story started to really take shape. It's funny, looking back, I realize now that I was just so used to powering through things in my life, whether it was work, through sickness, through relationships, whatever. I was simply brought up to, kind of put my head down and just work my butt off and work through things. And certainly in the case of film work, I absolutely loved the work. So I didn't mind working all hours. I felt really alive during these times, and I never thought twice about taking care of myself in other ways. I never really gave much thought to the idea of taking care of myself until right about that time in Chicago, working on that edit up in the attic in the dead of winter. That's when everything kind of came to a halt, and I was forced to re-examine how I was living my life. My doc life, if you will. And I learned a valuable lesson from that period of my life. And I've since come to learn that so many other creatives and professionals, they had to learn similar lessons themselves. And that's why, when we come back from the break, we're going to take a look at 5 ways to nurture your doc life. I'm Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is The Documentary Life. Did you know that each and every episode of The Documentary Life has its own show notes? I'm sure you've heard me mention them on an episode, but have you ever actually gone and checked them out? Because they often have some really nice supplemental materials that go in conjunction with that week's show. There are behind-the-scenes stills of filmmakers and their work. There are video clips. There's additional information on a show's topic, links to mentioned websites or resources, just to name a few of the things that you'll find within show notes. So if you haven't been regularly going to view show notes after listening to a show, you're actually missing out on materials that will further the week's discussion, thereby helping you best live and lead your own documentary life. So after today's show, go to thedocumentarylife.com and start delving into show notes for today's as well as past episodes. It's just another way to be a part of our Doc Lifer community. Before we get started on our 5 ways to nurture your doc life, I do want to acknowledge that we all have busy lives, we doc lifers. I mean, that's just kind of assumed, right? Many of us have day jobs, families, and our creative endeavors on top of all that. There often seems to be little time for other pursuits, let alone ones that might at first glance seem to be a bit selfish. I get it. We have a 1.5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. We have the Barong Films business. We have the Documentary Life podcast. We have our own doc project, Elvis of Cambodia. But I am here to reiterate to you, if you don't pay attention to at least some of these things that I'm about to impart to you, you risk suffering down the line. And I'm not just talking your creative life here. I'm talking about your family life, your relationships, your own health, both, believe me, mental and physical, you name it. So consider yourselves hereby warned, my doc lifers. Do take heed. Without further ado, here we go, in no particular order of importance. 5 ways to nurture your doc life. Number 1, exercise. Yeah, I know. Believe me, I know. Everyone preaches the importance of some kind of physical activity at some point throughout the day, every day. But hey, I'm certainly not going to deviate from this. And many of you already have some kind of exercise routine in your life, whether it's going to the gym, maybe going to yoga, running a few miles every day, or heading out to climb in nature after work. But I believe part of your responsibility as a creative is not only to keep your mind in good working order, and believe me, we'll get to that in a bit, but it's to keep your body fluid and functioning to capacity as well. If this means forcing yourself to get away from the edit or get away from the script and go for a walk for 30 minutes, so be it. It's well worth it. And the cool added benefit to exercising is that it often spurs the brain to be more active and creative. It's called endorphins, people. And the endorphins are what often get us excited in thinking about our doc project. I can't tell you how many times I've been out for a run and I'm listening to a podcast, or I've got some music that's pumping through the headphones, and I find myself inspired by a new idea for the podcast, or I've come up with a workaround solution to a problem that I've been having on an edit for my doc project. It happens all the time. For me, there's something about lacing up the shoes. This is me personally. Lacing up the shoes, putting on the headphones, stretching, and heading outside for a run, that it really starts to shift things for me mentally in those moments. It's as if, like I'm telling myself, okay, I'm now walking out, I'm walking away from this work or walking away from this thinking that I've been doing, and I'm going to give myself a break outside. I'm going to move my body and just let go. And it's uncanny that the moment that you let go, the answers to any issues you've been having, whether personal or professional, they just start to come to you. It's not unlike meditation in this way, I suppose. Running certainly feels like a form of therapy for me, to be honest. At the least it is. I'm able to just let my mind go and really just kind of be fluid for 30 minutes or however long. I would say don't take the idea of exercise lightly at all. It's not only important for your physical health, but I truly believe that there is a direct connection to the effectiveness of the creative mind with your physical body as well. Number 2, and I actually just mentioned this word, is it's meditation. I hope that I don't lose a few of you on this one. If you've never done it, it's not a scary thing. It's not a uber new agey thing. Trust me, it's not just something that half-naked dudes in India do or hipster yogis in San Francisco preach about. Meditation over the past decade has become a pretty mainstream thing in the Western world. Of course, countries in the Eastern Hemisphere have been embracing this form of mindfulness and self-reflection for centuries, and we in the West are finally getting around to it. Or maybe I should say we are finally stopping or pausing to it. Look, at this point, the health benefits of a meditation practice are pretty universally accepted. There are currently over 3,000 scientific studies that have been done on the subject, and I suspect that's only just the beginning. Those who meditate have 10 times more the concentration of those who don't. They've 50% less chance of disease, 75% less chance of depression. And by the way, I think that's a big one for us creatives. Meditation lessens stress, worry, and anxiety. It enhances self-esteem and self-acceptance. It improves your mood and emotional intelligence. It improves the immune system and energy level, reduces blood pressure, better decision-making and problem-solving, better information processing. The list goes on and on. You can do your own research on that. I'm just here to tell you that even just 15 minutes a day has been scientifically proven to do what I've just mentioned, and so much more. And I'm here to tell you that meditation quiets the negative chatter, the self-doubt, the naysaying, the pessimism, and these can all be very real things in our doc lives. Living a creative life, a doc life, if you will, often consists of many ups and downs, whether it be financial burdens, whether it be personal relationships, major creative lapses, whatever the case is, there are things in our lives that greatly impact our self-value and our self-belief. And that directly impacts our own belief in ourselves as artists, as documentary filmmakers. I don't have to recite more proven scientific health benefits of meditation. Again, that's easily found should you choose to do so. But I can tell you that I've personally benefited from the practice myself. It has given me more clarity in my life and in my films. It has allowed me to calm down in certain situations where honestly I might have before had an angry or otherwise reactionary response to a situation. And I can honestly say that for me personally, starting a daily meditation practice has without a doubt absolutely affected my life in very positive ways. And that certainly includes my creative life. It includes my documentary work. If you're looking for a primer, there's a great book out there by Sakyong Mipam called Turning the Mind into an Ally. It's a joy to read. It's not super heady either. Super pleasant and practical to read. There's also a documentary out there called On Meditation that's currently up on Netflix. That's a good one to watch for a primer as well. In fact, we'll actually be having a conversation with the director, Rebecca Dreyfuss, later on in the program. Anyhow, I'll try and remember to put up links in the show notes for all of this. So yeah, meditation. Number 3 is family and friends. Now, I think we all know the importance of this one, of having a community of loved ones that we see on a fairly regular basis. Doesn't mean we all adhere to it, of course. Hell no, we're doc lifers, right? I've made mention many times on this show, how we doc lifers, oftentimes, really by the very nature of independent documentary filmmaking, we can be working in fairly solitary situations. Certainly the post-production phase can be like this. But human beings, for the most part, we need to be around other human beings. This is also another one of those statistically proven facts, that we have a need. Our species has a need for love and support. That this sort of thing does in fact impact our well-being and overall health. And I know that it's probably a total surprise, but doc lifers, we are human beings, and we too require human interaction. Look, there are the health benefits that I briefly mentioned, but I'm not going to sit here. Actually, I'm standing. I'm not going to stand here and refute health science data related to human interaction. What I will tell you is that as an artist, I think too many times we've been told, or we see this notion that things like adversity or anxiety or even depression or solitude, those kinds of things are what make the great artists of the world. It's this romanticized notion that we need to be experiencing drama or hardship in order to truly be an artist. I can tell you, man, that's all bunk. And I definitely speak from experience. I was that tortured artist type for at least a third of my life. And I can say that a lot of it was a huge waste of time spent on my own, feeling sorry for myself and really just generally doing the navel-gazing thing. If this has described you at any point in time, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I speak of. Take a look at any of your work, or better yet, take a look at your journals from that time. You'll probably cringe. I know I do whenever I read some of the old writings when I've been experiencing that whole tortured artist thing. I remember editing on Bomb Hunters for like 5 months down in the basement of the director's house. And by the way, yes, I'm well aware that I seem to edit on people's projects in their basements and attics. Reason number 562 why you need a budget, guys. Anyhow, I remember immersing myself in the Cambodian footage, and it was not long after coming back from Cambodia. And the content in the story was, to say the least, at times heartbreaking. A lot of destruction and devastation from years of civil war. This material, on top of the fact that I was down in that basement 6 days a week working those super long hours, this really didn't make for a very happy Chris Parkhurst, and certainly not a very agreeable one to be around. But I remember my sister, who's one of my best friends, the following year she was talking about that time period, and she's telling me that I was a bear to be around, and that I exhibited a lot of anger and emotion during that time. I know that hindsight's 20/20, but honestly, looking back, I can safely say that most of the self-pity, the starving artist thing it was pretty unnecessary, man. I don't think it fueled my edit at all. I really don't. If anything, I'm sure it negatively impacted some of my editing choices. I mean, I remember there were scenes where the director kind of pulled me back a bit because I was being too heavy-handed in some of my approach, and I was too angry in my story, if that makes any sense. I'm pretty sure that if I had surrounded myself with loving people, or maybe even more appropriately, not shut myself out and away from my loved ones, and allowed them to support me, I personally would have been a lot better off, and my work probably would have come a bit easier, if not a bit more objectively, if that makes sense. In any case, I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say here. A support system via your family and your friends it's actually a very needed thing for us doc lifers. Sometimes we film some difficult things. Sometimes we work a lot of hours. Sometimes we just need someone to give us a fresh and proper meal or tell us a good joke. I have come to learn the hard way, believe me, that these, in fact, are the things that feed you as an artist. Sometimes a break from the intense doc work is exactly what you and your doc needs. Number 4 is diet and nutrition. I just mentioned a fresh meal. Yes, I am now going to talk, briefly about the virtues of a proper diet and nutrition. Believe me, I'm sorry if that annoys you. You can always skip on to the next one. That's okay, absolutely. But diet and nutrition is a real and important thing. Too often, we artists, we risk our own well-being for the sake of the art. I get it. I've done it a zillion times. Many times we have little time between shoots, or we have a less than satisfactory budget, and so we find ourselves maybe in the McDonald's drive-thru checking out the dollar menu and loading up on carbs and tricky meats and soda. It's a quick fix. It's cheap. It does the trick, right? But you've all seen Super Size Me, right? Sure, it's a bit extreme. We're not all taking our meals at Mickey D's for a month at a time, but nonetheless, there is an important message here. Pardon my French, but the shit's not really good for you. You've got to take care of the temple, is what I like to say. We already discussed the mental component, when I talked about meditation, but the more obvious component might be your general physical health, which doesn't just mean exercise, of course. It also includes diet and nutrition. Eating some proper foods and drinking some real drinks can go a long way for you. Stay hydrated. Bring lots of water to set. Consider a green juice instead of something with a lot of sugar in it. And I'm not talking about juices with added sugar. I'm talking about be aware of even the kinds of fruits in your juice that may be of higher glycemic content. Eat foods that aren't processed. Otherwise, you risk blood sugar levels spiking then dropping while you're working. But look, it's one thing if you hit the fast food up for lunch or on the way to set. It's one thing if you do this yourself while you're on your way to work, or while you're on your way to the gig, whatever. It's up to you. But if there is one thing you absolutely positively cannot mess around with, it's feeding your crew, especially a documentary crew who may be working for cheaper rates, if not even for free. You cannot buy your crew fast food. And don't bring coffee and donuts in the morning. Coffee, yes, because everyone knows there simply is not a world without coffee. Actually, I drink decaf, but don't tell anyone. But no donuts, please. It's embarrassing, and it just doesn't say the right thing from the very outset of the day. So yes, when it comes to your crew, the least you can do is show them the respect of a decent meal and snacks. I realize that there isn't exactly a budget for a craft services person, but you would do well to get some snacks that aren't pure sugar-based, and won't have your crew crashing midway through an interview. We used to have this craft services person in Portland on commercial shoots. And for the life of me, I could not understand how or why she kept getting hired on jobs. She would show up with things like Twizzlers, Smarties candies, donuts, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or toaster oven mozzarella sticks. And she'd serve these things to a professional crew. And this is in Portland, Oregon, where practically everything is organic or grass-fed or grown hydroponically. We even started to call her, she got a nickname at some point. We started to call her the Candy Clown. And I really don't know how she kept showing up on jobs or getting jobs. Crazy. Anyhow, I do digress. Show yourself and your crew some respect by showing up with healthy snacks and a good hot meal for lunch. It's important. And rounding out our 5 ways to nurture your doc life is watch documentaries. Most of you probably already do this, I'm sure, but it's also an easy one to forget. We're busy people, and we're working on our own documentary films, quite frankly. I actually have to make a very conscious effort to watch docs. That may seem strange, but the truth of the matter is I'm either A, busy working on my own doc, or B, working on this podcast, or C, being with my family, or D, sleeping. I truly barely have time to read anything, let alone devote 2 hours to watching a film. But I make myself do it. I literally have to schedule it out because it's important. Otherwise, I'm making films or talking about the making of films without maybe knowing or seeing how others are doing the craft. Nowadays, it seems like a new piece of equipment or a unique way to tell a story, it happens monthly, right? It's happening all the time. So if I'm not watching other people's docs, I'm not taking in how the craft is being done by my peers. And I'm potentially missing out on some great opportunities for ideas and approaches. So many times I've gone months without seeing a film. Then I sit down to watch one and I find myself immediately inspired, whether it be by the story or how the story was told, or later on after I've done some Googling, I learned the story of the filmmaker. Whatever the case, I'm left feeling more informed and inspired to work on my own project. In fact, a number of times I've been faced with a particular problem in my own work, and then I watch another film, and it totally shifts my way of thinking, kind of into a place where suddenly I'm able to come up with a really nice creative solution to my own problem on my film. And that very likely that wouldn't have happened without the process of watching a film. And I say process because I believe that the actual process of watching a film in itself, apart from the actual film even, the process of watching it can be a very important practice for us filmmakers. It allows us to see how things are seen. And there are lessons to be drawn from that. We need that reminder that someone will actually be sitting down, hopefully a hell of a lot more than someone, whether it's in a theater or on a TV at home or on a laptop, someone will be taking in our movie as an experience. And so it's good for us to be experiencing that experience on a regular basis ourselves. So if you're not already doing this regularly, and I'm sure that most of you are probably way better at it than I sometimes am, make a conscious effort to be watching other documentaries. Now, to revisit the 5 ways to nurture your documentary life. Number 1 was exercise. Number 2, meditation. 3, family and friends. Surround yourself with family and friends, that is. 4, diet and nutrition. And 5, watch documentaries. Now, these are just 5 ways that I came up with. I'd love for you to take a little time and come up with some of your own suggestions. I bet you've got some good ones that the group would love to hear. So either send me an email at chris@barongfilms.com, that's CHRIS@barongfilms.com, or make a comment in the show notes for this episode. Or maybe even better yet, get on the Documentary Life Community Facebook group and share some of your own ways that you nurture your own documentary life. It is now time for the Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week. This one comes from a Jamie, and I'm not sure where he is currently located. But in this email, he is replying to an email where I asked him about his engagement with his documentary subjects community. He says, "Hi, Chris. Thanks for replying to me. Very kind of you, sir. I have actually started social media for the film. We began after I released the concept trailer that I branded as our launch one and started our Twitter and Facebook presence. You can search for Masters of Mahjong and see it in a few places, but here's the Facebook link. In terms of the Mahjong community, my producer is a Mahjong fanatic who has spent time playing it in many countries and has her ear to the ground constantly with what's going on. We wouldn't be able to do this movie without her network. and it once again proves that documentaries must have great access to contributors and the subject to be able to delve deep enough into the story for it to be appealing and relatable. I myself reach out to contributors on a regular basis to touch base and keep the conversation alive while there's downtime between either filming or, probably more accurately put, between finding money for filming. Haha, totally get that one. You're absolutely right about the importance of this, though. We both said the community's acceptance or rejection of the movie was crucial to the success of it, and we're building slowly but surely. Then again, back to the business side of things, my approach is such that I want this to have mainstream appeal. It's a niche community with a nice hobby, but their efforts, struggles, highs and lows will hopefully all translate to a cinematic language anyone can understand. Let us see. Love the work you're doing, though, Chris. Please keep it up because I'm all for engaging in your valuable insight. I think you're the premier doc podcast out there, so rest assured I'm spreading the word about TDL. Thanks again. Well, Jamie, thank you certainly for spreading the word about TDL. I appreciate that. You know how this documentary networking thing works, and that's really a bit of what we're trying to achieve here with the program. So thanks for the love, brother. Totally appreciate that. And thanks for sharing a bit of your story. I watched your trailer for your Mahjong documentary, and I loved it. For anyone interested, Jamie's film website is www.mahjongmovie.com, and of course I'll try and remember to put a link up to it in the show notes. Now, the reason why I chose to read Jamie's email as opposed to maybe someone who had a specific question is that I think there's some really valuable thoughts here. We've talked on the show before about the importance of becoming engaged and connected to your community. In effect, building an audience well before the film is even shot, let alone finished. It sounds like Jamie and his producer have done just that. Of course, it does help that the producer was previously connected to the doc subject, for sure. But by the sounds of it, the two have continuously engaged with that community, whether it be through social media or simply through the various shoots that they've been on. And this sort of thing works on more levels than just building a community and audience for one's film, certainly. Without the time and effort and networking that these two have done, their film would probably most likely end up a film that just sort of touches the surface of the subject, if that makes sense. I'm sure that it was through the constant and consistent engaging with the subjects of the doc, and as well as fans of Mahjong, that these filmmakers were able to make true inroads with not only the story, but the very story of the lives of the people involved. And that's a huge thing for us as doc lifers. It takes time to build these relationships, but in the end, it certainly will be well worth the time. Anyhow, thanks again for the email, Jamie. I'm excited to see how this film turns out. It looks pretty fun, and I will definitely be checking it out. If you would like to offer up some feedback of your own or give us some topic or guest suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. So please email me at chris@barongfilms.com, and you too could be included in a future Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week segment. When we come back from the break, we talk with award-winning doc filmmaker Rebecca Dreyfuss. Our shared conversation with the doc industry guest segment up next on The Documentary Life. When I first came up with the idea for the Documentary Life podcast, I was hoping to reach out and start connecting with other like-minded individuals and maybe create a community where doc filmmakers could learn from and get inspired by one another. And I wanted to have conversations that weren't just about the technical aspects of documentary filmmaking. I wanted to also be having discussions on what it meant to live the life of a creative, in our case, as doc filmmakers. And to my pleasant surprise and amazement, that is precisely what has happened with both the podcast and our community group. And now, we've expanded upon that idea with the release of Living Your Documentary Life, a program that breaks down the ways in which you can, through the creation of your art, live a sustainable, creative, and fulfilling documentary life. In Living Your Documentary Life, we remove the obstacles that you currently have in your life that are holding you back from making your documentary film, whether that be financial obligations, your immediate relationships, or your mindset and confidence in your abilities. You will gain perspective, build momentum, and create a lifestyle that serves you, creating your best documentary filmmaking projects. If this sounds like the kind of doc life that you want to be leading, we'd love to help. Just head on over to thedocumentarylife.com/yourdoclife and let's get you living and leading your best doc life today. Rebecca Dreyfuss, welcome to the program. It's exciting to have you on our conversation today here in the Documentary Life.
Cool. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Rebecca, I think right out of the gate, one of the first things I will ask you is how did you first find yourself into this world of documentary filmmaking? How did that happen for you?
The first film that I ever wanted to make was about my dad, who was he had to flee Germany because of the war, because of World War II, and he wound up in Shanghai, which is a kind of an unknown story. So a lot of people don't know, but there was actually a Jewish ghetto in Shanghai.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wanted to make a film about my dad's experiences, but like a lot of people who had been through those kind of experiences, he didn't want to talk about it. So, but I sort of understood from, the time I was young that my dad had a story and that the story had great power. At least it did to me as a kid. Like there was sort of this story going on around, and it had a lot of power. And although I didn't figure out how to get together with my dad and make that film because he really didn't want it, it sort of opened the door for me to realize the power of story and to realize like there's a whole world of stories out there. So while I didn't get to make my dad's film, I realized that this was something that could be really meaningful in terms of just millions of stories that are out there.
Right. Why documentary film as the format with which to tell his story? Why was documentary so intriguing to you?
That's a good question. I think for me, documentary, I have dabbled in fiction, and I actually have a fiction script I'm working on right now. But I think one of the things about documentary that has worked for me is actually the process itself. So, in other words, when you're making a fiction movie, most of the time, although of course there's exceptions, you write a script, you have to raise the money, you shoot for a certain amount of days, and that's kind of done, and you're kind of dependent on other people, and that you have to raise the money to do it, and you do it all in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
Although of course there are exceptions to that, as I said. But with documentary, the process is really different, and you can kind of explore your subject matter through shooting. There's no reason why, particularly in this digital age that we live in, that you can't just start shooting.
Yeah, that's right, right.
And see where it leads you, which, so much of documentary, I think, is just being open to where something's going to lead you and you don't know anyway. So I tend to be very kind of independently minded. And so the idea that I could have an idea and just start shooting without needing permission from a lot of other people was appealing to me.
Yeah, right. So how long after having this idea that you wanted to pursue perhaps documentary filmmaking, or at least do your first documentary film, how long between that and Bye Bye Babushka, your true first feature documentary film?
So I made a film in film school. My thesis film was a documentary. And so that I kind of got my feet wet. It was about a woman married to an inmate in the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And that was very much a verite kind of exploration. And then I guess between that and Bye Bye Babushka was maybe 5 years or something. Because I graduated from college. And then I was hired to go. I was hired to shoot on a film in Russia for somebody else's film, and I wound up spending the summer in Siberia and just became. And then it sort of turned out to be around the same time of this complete bursting open of what had been the Soviet Union and was now just this up for grabs kind of place. So it was very fascinating to me. So I guess, there was 5 or 6 years in between graduating and then kind of starting that journey, which, like most of the films, at least that I've been involved in, they take a long time. That's one thing I kind of always warn younger filmmakers is or they'll come to me and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to have it ready for some deadline of some festival, which is in like 6 months from then.
Right.
But
I'm
like,
submitting for Sundance in September.
I'm like, maybe if you're lucky, maybe next year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I find the process is been lengthy, and that those, people will sometimes ask me like, well, how long did that film take you? And I'm always like, well, it depends when you start counting. Do you start counting when you first had the idea? Do you start when you first, had a shoot? Like that process is very, long as far as I have had that experience with
Be patient. Be patient, right?
Yeah. And also like having people, say no, and then kind of coming back around, and a door that was closed may open because you're in a different place, and realizing that process can be very surprising.
Right. Well, we talk a lot about that on the program, is this idea as doc filmmakers that, yeah, this thing doesn't happen overnight. And in fact, the most sort of genuine relationships we see on film when we watch a doc is that happens through the course of time. Like, that takes time to build that relationship between you and your subject. And often that's months, if not even years, sometimes before our subjects can really become comfortable with having, somebody else in their life that's filming them all the time. And I think that that's an important thing to note that you're saying there, Rebecca, is that it does take time. And part of that is really needing to be patient, because you have to realize that you're in someone else's life and you're filming their life, and it takes time to build that relationship.
And also, like, whatever your initial intent was, or whatever the initial thing that interested you in the story could evolve into something else.
Again, something we talk about is that's pretty, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, that's, it's a bit unique to documentary versus narrative, in that, oftentimes, we have these ideas for our documentary films, and myself included, 9 times out of 10, the idea or that I had at the outset is often not what I end up with a film at the end. And it's this kind of balance that we have to have as doc filmmakers to, sort of, we have our vision of what the story is or what we're hoping the story will be, but then often these sort of different paths reveal themselves along the way. And you have to be able to not only be willing to make certain choices, but be open to the fact that there are choices and different avenues that the film will take us down.
Completely. And sometimes it's very uncomfortable, because you had an idea, you have to kind of, be, like you're saying, be open. And if you're open, means you have to kind of maybe let go of an idea that you had. And that's hard to do. And sometimes things are happening in real time, like something will happen to the person that you're shooting all of a sudden that's totally unexpected, and you have to be ready to go with that. And it's happening quickly. And
can you think of anything in your own work, Rebecca, where that sort of instance has happened for you, where an avenue sort of presented itself and you had to make a decision on maybe changing course from where you thought you were originally headed?
Yeah, for sure. It's happened multiple times.
Yeah.
I guess maybe one sort of obvious example of that is so I made, which you may have checked out, since you know about Bye Bye Babushka, obviously you did your research. I made a film called Stolen.
Of course, a big one, yeah.
Yeah, which is about the art heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And in the course of making that film, I just was sort of interviewing people and wasn't really sure what the film was going to be about. But to me, the main characters were sort of the paintings and, Isabella in a way. But then I came across this investigator who was sort of himself very obsessed with paintings. And if you see the film, one thing about the investigator is that he's disfigured.
Oh yeah, I mean, immediately on screen, it's a very striking image, right?
It's a very striking image. And so when I met him, he first of all, and I actually have had this happen to me more than once. He acted like he was waiting for me and the crew to arrive, and that it was sort of almost assumed that now we were making the film with him. Um,
And how did you
I,
navigate that one?
that's the thing, it was happening very quickly, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden he was calling me with a million ideas.
Oh man.
And I had this moment of pause, like, can I really have this person be featured in my film because he was so heavily disfigured?
Right.
And was that going to be distracting, or was the film suddenly going to be about this guy and this disfigurement? And that wasn't really what my intention was. But as I started to think about it and let it sink in a little bit, I realized, like, this is a man who's disfigured and visually striking, and that he doesn't look normal.
Mm.
And he is spending his life, searching for kind of beauty and
Oh
these
man.
lost paintings, and that there was some kind of tension in that was really beautiful. But it took me a little while from the time I met him and him instantly kind of calling me with, we should shoot this, we have to shoot that. What time can
Yeah.
you meet? And it wasn't like, if you watch the film, he's really the main character of the film.
Oh yeah.
But it wasn't like I met him and decided to make the film. I decided to make the film, and then I met him, and it was like, okay, are you going to shift gears and have this person be the main character? And then if you see the film, in my opinion, he makes the film.
Yeah. Right.
But that was something that I had to, kind of, the film was guiding me. And I think that, I'm sure you've had this experience. If you really get in it with a film, and I think this is true of fiction or nonfiction, like at a certain point, if it's authentic and there's something creative really happening, like that creative magic that happens that you don't really have control over,
Yeah.
the main thing you have to do is let it guide you, and be willing to surrender to that.
The Gardner case has intrigued me since it occurred.
These robbers were people that were associated with you. 2 of them are dead now. They died of natural causes.
Not really.
There is always a possibility that someone will come forward.
As doc filmmakers, there's a certain amount of letting go of your ego at some point, especially when a story takes a change in the way that it obviously did with you and Stolen, and it just made me think of ego there. Like you have to be, as a filmmaker, it's a doc filmmaker in particular, I think, be willing to be open to these avenues like we were talking about, and that's not easy for creatives. Like ourselves to do at times, because we come in, certainly as directors, we come in with visions that we have for our stories, and there's lessons to be learned there on our end in terms of letting go of that ego, if that makes any sense.
No, I mean, let's face facts. Directors, for the most part, are a bunch of control freaks.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So coming into something with wanting to mold something or shape it in your vision, and then something happening which is like, actually no, you're going to go make a left turn here as the film's dictating,
Yeah.
or are you going to try to impose your will? And most of the time, most good documentary filmmakers will go with it, but it's sort of at odds with this whole idea of your vision and why people are attracted to being directors.
Totally.
So that's something I think we all struggle with.
While we're on the topic of Stolen now, I would be remiss not to mention Albert Maysles, who is brought on as a lead camera on Stolen. And from what I understand, there's a relationship between the two of you that's developed, perhaps maybe even in a mentor sort of way. And my gosh, like how does that happen? Of course, Albert Maysles is legendary, right? So please tell me how that came to be for you.
Well, so Albert's a Russophile, or he was, as I should say. He passed away, I guess, 2 years ago. So Albert was a Russophile. The very first film that he made, he went to Russia. He and David went to Russia, and they were able to get access to like a mental hospital in Russia.
Of course, right.
So, which is like unbelievable, because I mean, I don't really know off the top of my head what year it was, but it was the 50s.
Oh yeah.
So
sure, it was the
America
50s.
getting access to anything in the 50s was,
Unheard of.
I mean, beyond unheard of.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know what Albert's magic was, but it sort of started there, and then he had a very strong affinity for Russia. And so I forget how somehow I got connected to him when I made Bye Bye Babushka.
Yeah.
Somebody had introduced, I can't remember, somebody had introduced us, and I showed him the film, and he kind of fell in love with the film.
Right.
And we sort of became friends around our mutual love of filming in Russia. And then it turned out like this was back in the days Albert famously lived in the Dakota, and I lived right near the Dakota. I lived one block from the Dakota. So we kind of, had all this stuff in common. We became friends. And then he was like, what are you working on next?
Right.
And I told him, that I had this idea at that point. It was to secede for the Gardner theft movie.
Yeah.
And it turned out, that Albert was from Boston. And then there's also this kind of strange coincidence that this is very funny, but Albert's wife's father was a protege of a man named Bernard Berenson.
Okay.
And Bernard Berenson is, sort of a famous person and is sort of creating art history as a valuable line of study. At the turn of the last century, he was very famous. And he had been very instrumental in helping Isabella Gardner collect her art.
Wow, okay.
At the turn of the last century. So not only was Albert from Boston, but his wife had this direct connection to Isabella Gardner.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So almost kind of like Harold, the main character in the film who I mentioned earlier, Albert was also very like, okay, when are we shooting? Let's go out and shoot.
I was going to ask you that.
So, as a young filmmaker, I was a little bit like, talking to my producer and I were like, well, Albert wants to shoot with us. And,
Yeah.
What do you think? And it was like, yeah, I guess that's a good idea.
Right. You're going to say no, right?
Yeah, we're going to say no. And I have to say that, it was magical having Albert. Albert was just a magical person to have on a shoot because he had this quality of just, kind of making the room be sort of delicious and open no matter who you were filming or whoever was in the room. He sort of brought this level of emotional openness, which is obviously why he's such a genius. But I mean, that's a very intangible thing. You can't he's a great cameraman. There's no denying his technical and creative skills as a cameraman, but he also physically as a human being embodied something very special that he brought to the room when he was there.
A lot of listeners reach out to me asking about this idea of a mentorship. And so I'm curious, having had an experience, obviously on a much, I don't want to say a level of, there's one thing to have a typical mentor, right, that we have. And then there's another level of meeting somebody who's a legendary sort of in the field, in particular, in this case, documentary filmmaking. But I wonder if you could recommend, to someone who's a budding doc filmmaker, somebody who's set to make their first doc, how do you find a mentor? Or do they just find you? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think mentors are incredibly important. And can really change your trajectory as a filmmaker if you find the right person, as certainly Albert did for me. I think, the only thing that sort of immediately comes to mind is to find a filmmaker who you are in love with and you're in love with their work, and figure out a way to share your work with them, or, and the thing about it is you have to, whether it's filming or trying to, get a relationship with somebody that you think could be helpful to you, is you have to be very determined, So if you're going to reach out to somebody who might be of note, they're probably not going to answer you right away.
Totally, right.
And if you're going to be dissuaded by that or get your feelings hurt by that, forget it. Don't bother.
Yeah.
Kind of come at them from 6 different ways, and then write them a letter, send them a film, try to find out someone who maybe could directly connect you, a friend of a friend. Like, you have to kind of come at it from different ways.
Okay.
And obviously another great way is a professor. If you go to film school, is to meet somebody, professor at film school, but not everybody goes to film school, so that's not available to everybody.
Let's move on a little bit towards your film On Meditation. How and why? I'm assuming that you had a connection to the subject itself. Now I've only recently seen On Meditation, And I certainly have a lot of thoughts on the film. And so I'd love to hear from you, because, by the way, I really appreciated this film on a number of levels. Absolutely. And so I'd love to hear, what was your connection to the subject? How did the project on meditation happen?
Well, it's really very basic, which is that I was trying to start a meditation practice and I was struggling. I was having, my joke about it, I say, is like, just ask me to do anything but sit quietly by myself.
Isn't that perfect?
So I had been kind of exposed to a little bit in yoga class. I was doing a lot of yoga, and I had been, in yoga class, sometimes there'll be meditation, and I had very quickly some very brief but deep experiences in yoga class.
Yeah.
And I got interested in it. I started trying to do it, and I was immediately kind of frustrated by it. So I really started by just wanting to hear how other people did it.
Oh, wow.
And it's such a kind of private interior thing that I felt like, we always talk in documentary about issues of access.
Right.
So I wanted to access how people sort of cultivated an inner life, as opposed to, just get access to them as human beings. I wanted to access not only to them, but to their inner life. And so,
well, I'm going to stop you here for a second, because there's access to people who can speak upon a given subject, and then there's access to the type of people that you brought on to speak to on the subject.
right.
And these are big names in the industry. These are celebrity names. I guess I'd first ask, why the decision to go with recognized names like this? And then how did you get the access to all these guys?
For me, like, choosing subjects is very intuitive. Like, I meet people and I just have a sense of like, oh, I would love to film that person, or that my documentary instinct is like, oh, that person, there's something for me to learn, or there's some layers I'm really interested in peeling back. And I couldn't really describe what exactly makes that bell go off in my head. But that's always been a very strong component for me in filmmaking, is just the attraction to filming certain people. So the first person that I really, really wanted to film was Peter Matheson.
Oh, absolutely. Snow Leopard was huge for me when I was doing a doc work in Nepal.
So I just got it into my head that I was going to shoot Peter Matheson.
Nice.
And Peter Matheson absolutely did not want me to shoot him.
Oh, wow.
So if you want to talk about determination,
let's hear that. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Well, I spent 2 years, or maybe a year and a half. I can't remember exactly. It was a while ago now. I spent a long time pursuing Peter Matheson, and Peter Matheson, he wouldn't email. So I wound up getting in a snail mail correspondence with him.
Fantastic. Very appropriate.
Which was the only way to communicate with him. And I just kind of wouldn't give up. And he really was like, there's nothing to talk about meditation. All you have to do is meditate, and there's nothing to say.
Oh, wow.
Words are useless. But I was just, again, very, very determined. So after much back and forth and kind of insistence, we wound up getting an appointment, and we went to his house. And, the funny thing is, then when we got to his house, he opened the door and he said, "Oh, I forgot you were coming."
Hey.
But it comes back to this, thing about determination. Like, if I was going to take no for an answer, I would have had a no a long time ago. But sometimes I joke that no is just the beginning conversation. No is the opening conversation. So it sort of started, like, I don't know, it was maybe the Snow Leopard or reading Peter's work, or I had a friend who had him as a professor at Yale, so I knew a little bit about him, and it just, between his work and the way he spoke and the way he looked, like that sort of combination of things, just, there was something in me that was very, very determined to capture him.
I'll bet.
So that was one person. And then I think from there, I realized that I was interested in shooting people who were in some way accomplished, because they had used their meditation practice to do great things in the world. which as filmmakers, we all have aspirations to do big things in the world. Or at
That's
least
right.
So I didn't just want people that had cultivated like really deep practices, but I wanted people who had cultivated deep practices and used it to good end to be out in the world. So I didn't really want people secluded in the monastery. I wanted people that had done, good things in the world and wanted to know how their practices had helped them do that. And then I also was very interested in sort of a crossover audience, because there's people that are interested in meditation and yoga, and then there's people who it's not really on their radar. So bringing in some kind of notable, I call them, notable people, I think opened up the audience a little bit, or at least that was my intention. I don't know if it did or not, but that was my intention.
I was accepted to the American Film Institute, and I was given an opportunity to make my first feature. I was given money. I had all the equipment I could dream of given to me. At this point, I remember standing and looking at this wall, thinking I should be the happiest person on earth. But I looked inside, and the happiness was just a dance on the surface. Below, hollow. I said, whoa, no inner happiness. Looking back, I felt I had a weakness. I wasn't self-assured. Even though I had great desires and, ideas, I had anxieties like crazy, like everybody. I had a kind of a tremendous anger toward my first wife. I wasn't, dealing with a full deck.
A favorite segment, which took me entirely by surprise because I absolutely had my own biases and assumed that I would not at all appreciate what this guy had to say. But man, did he surprise me. And now I feel like I have a different appreciation for him is David Lynch. David Lynch really, really took me by surprise. Because I loved his words. I loved hearing he's very thoughtful how he speaks, and how he went out one day and he realized that I have all of this success coming my way as a filmmaker, and yet I am not a happy person. And I think a lot of us have struggled with that thought. And so I just felt like it was a very genuine, down to earth sort of thing and story to tell. And I really loved that moment with David Lynch, for sure.
Yeah, he was wonderful. He was really wonderful. I felt really lucky to have him.
How is meditation? How is meditation a part of the creative process?
Well, I have to say, first of all, and when I get in these discussions, sometimes I get a little bit uncomfortable because I don't in any way claim to have some sort of spiritual advancement or,
Totally.
I'm not a total like yogi and meditator, and I go in and out of practice. Like I had a very strong practice for a while, and then my mom passed away, and that kind of diverted me off my path. I'm just getting back into it again. But I think, one of the things that I learned is that, there's all these different traditions of meditation.
Right.
And they all sort of serve different purposes, or people, I think, get attracted to one form of meditation or another for different reasons, because they all can give you different benefits. So I, through my journey, wound up being most connected or most attracted actually to Vedic meditation, which is TM, which is what David Lynch does, which is a mantra-based meditation. And I do think that particular meditation style, of all the ones I investigated, does give you the most direct access to your subconscious. And you could certainly see that in David's work, right? I mean, the famous for, some weird subconscious thing arising in his film.
That's right.
And I do think that kind of Vedic meditation brings you sort of into a place in your consciousness that you can't go any other way. And so I don't know if that's why I was most attracted to it. but it does kind of bring you into a river of creativity when from that kind of sitting practice that I have found useful in thinking about ideas or being more open in a moment to an idea that I might not have been open to before I had that practice. One thing I have to say also about this is about this journey is I was extremely naive going into it, in terms of the different traditions and how many thousands of types of meditation there are. I was really interested in people and their personal journeys, which is my interest in filmmaking. But once I got into it, I realized this is, it's like sort of saying you're interested in sports. It's like, well, what kind of sports are you interested in? When you start talking about meditation, what kind of meditation are you interested in? So
yeah, but it's funny because you can use that as a doc filmmaker really well to your advantage. Sort of if you're sort of naive or this sort of idea of a naivete to a subject, that can work to your advantage because you can ask questions that maybe you might not ask if you sort of knew about the subject or you quote unquote knew not to ask, right? I think you can use that to your advantage. You might be even more open, if you're less familiar with a particular subject.
I agree with that. I kind of think it's a balance between doing your homework and not.
Right, because you have to do your homework, of course.
You do have to do some homework, but I agree with you. I like kind of coming in as a naive outsider.
Yeah.
I do like that. Because also when you talk to people who are deeply immersed in something or expert on a subject, very often they know so much that they're missing the most basic parts of what the discussion is. And so you can kind of help back it up and make it more accessible because you're just trying to wait on a base. Wait, what are you saying?
Yeah, right.
What does that mean? And they're already so advanced that they've skipped over the first, 30% of what the subject matter is and gone to a more advanced level. And I'm good at sort of being like, no, wait, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I can make that sort of analogous to some of the film work that I do. A lot of the doc work that I do tends to be stories out of Southeast Asia, predominantly Cambodia and Nepal. And Cambodia has kind of become a home away from home for me since I started doing work in back there in 2004. And one of the things that I have to remind myself often is I have become so used to certain images and seeing certain things in that culture that often I have to remind myself that my viewers, most of them have never seen, some of the things that I'm seeing and that I sort of take for granted. I kind of have to, as a doc filmmaker, I have to remind myself often that things are not, things that I may be accustomed to seeing are entirely new things. And so I have to kind of keep that in mind and sort of use that framing when I'm doing film work over there, in particular in Southeast Asia, if that makes sense. It kind of reminded me of that.
It totally makes sense. Yeah, for sure.
What I'm going to do now, I think, Rebecca, is I'm going to throw a number of questions your way and just kind of give me your immediate responses to these. And these are going to be very applicable to, a doc filmmaking community.
Okay.
Can you think of 3 pieces of sort of key advice to someone who may be starting out as a doc filmmaker? They're working on their first doc. What are 3 pieces of key advice that you might have for that first time doc filmmaker?
Okay, so the first 2 I think are connected to each other. So one is, be determined. If you really want to make something, find a way to do it. Don't take no for an answer. Or if you do really find a door not open that you wanted to get access to, find another way. So be determined. And then that's connected to my second piece of advice is that if you're really going to make a film, especially if we're talking about feature docs in particular, there isn't any one person that should make or break your film. Now, obviously, if you're trying to make a film about one specific person, that is a different story. But if you're interested in the subject matter or some kind of journey, there shouldn't be one particular thing that makes or breaks your project. Really, you have to kind of know you're in it. Pace yourself. You're in it for the long haul. There's not one thing that should put you off your film if it's really, really what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because your film is going to be a series of obstacles. That's all it is. No.
It is, and it's navigating your way in and around and over those obstacles, right?
Right. So if you're looking for a reason not to make your film, you're going to find 100 of them.
Oh, there's plenty. Yes, there are plenty. What are some key tools or resources, and this could be books, it could be people, it could be other films, that you sort of continuously come back to as a doc filmmaker?
I think it's just watching doc films, watching them and figuring out what's interesting to you and what kind of filmmaker you want to be. What are you interested? Is the content more interesting to you? Is the style more interesting to you? And constantly be evolving and refining that. So I would say watching other people's films, whether that's contemporary ones or, old, classics.
Or old Albert Maysles in Russia documentary films.
Exactly.
Is there a moment where you thought, yeah, this is it. Okay, I've arrived. I'm a documentary filmmaker now. And if so, when was that moment?
I don't know if I can agree with
You haven't arrived yet? It doesn't feel like that?
Well, it feels like, I think once you make a couple of films and then you go back and look at them, you don't have any, you're sort of like, oh yeah, I remember that. So I kind of, once I'm done, I really put them behind me.
Yeah.
And then every time I start out again, even though I have obviously developed certain skills and certain methods for working, I do sort of feel like every time is a clean slate. And I don't sort of feel like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I never exactly feel like in some ways I do feel like I know what I'm doing more than I did, 15 years ago. But I never completely feel like, oh, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I know what I'm doing.
That's
great.
I don't. I love that. I love that answer. That's fantastic. As we wrap up here, one thing that I did fail to mention is that how can we see some of your films? On Meditation, I know, is playing Netflix right now. How can we see some of the other films? Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. You can also stream it off my website, onmeditation.com.
Awesome.
Stolen, you can get it off my website, stolenthefilm.com.
Okay. And I will go ahead and put links up on our show notes for sure. Thank you so much for being on the Documentary Life podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Rebecca.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Don't forget, if you're looking to live and lead a documentary life, you need to head over to thedocumentarylife.com/yourdoclife and take a look at our Living Your Documentary Life program. We'll help you craft your lifestyle so that you are able to make the documentary films that you want to make and live the doc life you want to live. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.